At 2 a.m., my granddaughter whispered from the ER that her boyfriend pushed her down the stairs. So I walked into the hospital that bears my name. The phone rang at exactly 2:07 in the morning, and before I even picked it up, my body already knew. 67 years old, and I still have that particular wiring, the kind that separates a call that can wait until morning from one that cannot. It got me upright before the second ring, feet on the cold floor, heart already calculating. I answered. I heard breathing, then her voice, a voice I have known since the first cry it ever made, came through the line broken and thin and barely holding together. "Grandma, I'm here," I said. "I'm at the emergency room." A pause. A sound underneath the words I won't try to describe. Marcus pushed me down the stairs. He told the nurse I was drunk. He said I tripped. Another pause. The kind that lasts 3 seconds and contains something enormous. Mom was here. She chose to believe him. She left with him, Grandma. She just left. I did not panic. I did not cry. I did not say a single word that could be used against me later because I was already thinking about later. Already thinking about what needed to happen, in what order, and who needed to be called before I walked through that hospital's front doors. Because those doors have my name on them. And no one, not Marcus Thiel, not a frightened intake nurse, not my own daughter's catastrophic blindness, was going to determine what happened inside them tonight. Chloe, I kept my voice even. The voice I used for 30 years in emergency rooms when everything was falling apart and someone in the room needed to be the one who didn't. Don't sign anything. Don't speak to anyone about what happened. I'm on my way. I was dressed in 4 minutes. My name is Dorothy Hargrove. I'm 67 years old. I take my coffee black. I sleep 6 hours a night. And I built a hospital from the ground up with nothing but a nursing degree. 30 years of refusing to be told no, and a husband who believed in me more steadily than I sometimes deserved. Victor used to say that God made me efficient, and then ran out of time to make me patient. He wasn't wrong. He was right about most things, which is probably why I miss him every single morning. I tell you this not because my credentials matter for their own sake, but because you need to understand who Marcus Thiel decided he was dealing with when he moved into my granddaughter's apartment and began building a legal architecture around her inheritance. He thought he was dealing with a manageable 67-year-old woman who didn't read people. He was wrong. That is the foundation of this entire story. I need to tell you about Renee before I tell you about Marcus, because Marcus is a symptom. Renee is the story underneath the story. My daughter is 42 years old. She was born on a Wednesday in October during a double shift I was not supposed to be working. Victor drove me to the hospital at 6 in the morning, and by noon I had held her for 40 minutes before a code in the ICU pulled me back to the floor. I have carried those 40 minutes for 4 decades. Renee has made sure of it. She grew up believing that love was measured in presence, and that my presence was always somewhere else. She wasn't entirely wrong. The hospital needed me in ways that were urgent and loud. Renee needed me in ways that were quieter, steadier, and much easier to postpone. Victor tried to fill the space I left. He was a better parent than I was in all the ways that required sitting still, but even he couldn't fill the specific shape of what Renee needed. She needed to be chosen, publicly, visibly, by someone who could have chosen anyone else and chose her instead. It is a particular kind of hunger, and it makes a person vulnerable to a very particular kind of man. She married twice before Chloe's father. The third relationship never made it to a wedding. Chloe came from it anyway, and her father was gone before she turned 4, and I privately believed his leaving saved both of them from something worse. Chloe came to me that same year, not formally, not with paperwork, but in the way that actually matters. She came to me the way children come to the adult who makes them feel steady in an unsteady world. I became the one who picked her up from school on the days Renee's emotions were too large to leave room for anyone else's needs. I became the one who made scrambled eggs at 7 in the morning and listened to her read her homework out loud. I sat with her for 3 hours the afternoon she got her medical school acceptance letter and didn't know yet whether to scream or cry. We chose both, in that order. Chloe is 19 years old. She has my eyes, Victor's laugh, and a precision of mind that, when I watch her work through a problem, sometimes stops my breath. She is also the primary beneficiary of Victor's trust, a fact that has never needed to be a secret because it has never needed to be a weapon, until Marcus Thiel came to Thanksgiving dinner 14 months ago and changed the terms of everything. He arrived with an easy smile and the kind of confidence that reads as attractive until you spend enough time with it to realize it never adjusts for the room. He talked about himself for the first 40 minutes without asking a single question about anyone else. Renee watched him the way she has always watched men she admires, with hungry approval, as if his presence validated something in her. Chloe sat beside him and laughed at everything he said. The laugh was a half-second too quick. I know that laugh. I have produced it myself in rooms where women learn early that laughter is cheaper than conflict. After dinner, I was in the kitchen when I heard his voice lower in the hallway. Not angry, just quiet in that particular way that is its own kind of pressure. I couldn't hear the words, but I heard Chloe's response. Silence. Then a quick agreement. Then footsteps moving in the direction he wanted. I noted it. I said nothing. This is its own kind of failure, and I have made my peace with that. The failure of the woman who sees clearly, calculates the cost of speaking, and decides the cost is too high. I told myself it was early. I told myself I could be wrong. I told myself Renee would not forgive another instance of her mother's interference. All of those things were true. None of them were sufficient. By Christmas, the signs were less deniable. Chloe had stopped texting me the small things, the photos of her study notes, the late-night anatomy questions, the random observations about patients she'd seen during her hospital volunteering. The channel went quiet. At the Christmas dinner table, Marcus arrived 40 minutes late, smelling of alcohol he was functional enough to hide. He sat beside Chloe, put his hand on the back of her chair, said something into her ear that made her smile with her mouth and not her eyes. At one point, she leaned over to ask him something quietly, and he gripped her arm just below the elbow. A brief, firm grip. The grip of a man who has learned that correction doesn't need to be loud to land. Chloe's eyes found mine for a half second across the table. Then she looked away, and I, with all my clinical training, all my 30 years of emergency room admissions, all my 67 years of knowing exactly what that looks like in the beginning, before the beginning becomes a pattern. I looked down at my plate and let the moment pass. That moment sits lowest and most stubbornly in my chest when I try to sleep. I have examined it from every angle in the month since. I don't find a version of it I'm proud of. What I did not know, what none of us knew, was how fast the beginning was already becoming the middle. The call that changed the shape of everything came on a Tuesday morning in January. I was at my kitchen island with my second coffee and a board report I was annotating in red pen when my phone rang. Dr. Patricia Simmons, Chloe's family physician, a woman I have known professionally for over a decade. I answered before the second ring. Dorothy. Her voice had the careful quality physicians use when delivering information they don't yet know how to frame. I recognized it immediately. I have used it myself. I received a request for Chloe's complete medical file, she said. The authorization form listed the requester as Marcus Thiel, identified as her emergency contact and as her healthcare proxy. I set down my coffee cup very deliberately. Chloe has never designated a healthcare proxy. She's 19 and healthy. It's not something we would have discussed. And the form bore her signature, but Dorothy, I have her signature on file from her intake forms 3 years ago. This one doesn't match. It's close, but it isn't right. The kitchen was very quiet. I denied the request, Patricia said, and flagged it for our compliance office. But I thought you needed to know. He is attempting to build legal access to her medical history with a forged signature. I kept my voice entirely steady. I am proud of that. Don't release anything to anyone without speaking to me first. Keep a copy of that request form. Already done. Dorothy, is she safe? I looked out the window at Victor's garden. The roses were bare in January. Everything was bare in January. She will be, I said. I hung up, opened my notebook, the small leather one I've kept by my bed for 30 years to track decisions that matter. I wrote the date, the time, Patricia's name, then 2 words underneath, healthcare proxy, forged. Then I sat with it for exactly 3 minutes. Then I called Judith. Judith Calloway has been my personal attorney for 22 years. She is 61 years old, sharp as a carefully maintained blade, and one of approximately 4 people in this world to whom I tell the unedited version of things. She picked up on the first ring, because Judith, like me, does not let important calls go to voicemail. I told her everything in order. The Christmas dinner, the missed calls, the volunteer coordinator who said Chloe hadn't been in since before the holidays, Patricia's call, the forged form. When I finished, she was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted, come to my office tomorrow, 8 o'clock. Don't discuss this with Renee. Don't contact Chloe in any way that could read as an alert. Bring the notebook. What does it look like to you right now? I asked. It looks like someone attempting to establish legal control over a young woman's medical decisions. A pause. Which would be a precursor to establishing legal control over her financial interests, particularly if she is the beneficiary of a significant estate. Victor's trust. Chloe had been the primary beneficiary since she was 6 years old. When Victor died, the terms transferred to my oversight, and at my passing, 40% of the Hargrove Medical Center endowment and all of the residential properties transferred to her. It had never needed to be a secret. It had never needed to be a weapon, until now. I'll be there at 8, I said. Judith had already pulled case precedents when I arrived. There was a yellow legal pad on her desk with notes I could read upside down, a skill I developed in 30 years of medical board meetings and have never lost. I caught the words undue influence and capacity challenge and elder financial abuse before she turned the pad over. She explained it with the precision of a surgeon moving from the surface to the thing underneath. A healthcare proxy is not only about medical decisions. In some legal arguments, it can be used as a stepping stone in a capacity challenge. If Marcus could establish that Chloe had designated him as her medical decision maker, it suggested she trusted his judgment over her own in moments of crisis. Combined with a psychiatric evaluation, even a questionable one, and testimony from people willing to describe behavioral instability, you could construct a narrative, not a true narrative, a legal one, designed to challenge her fitness to receive the trust inheritance. And if her fitness is challenged successfully, I said, who administers her interests in the interim? Judith held my gaze. Whoever is named in the challenge as a responsible party. She didn't need to say his name. I want to hire an investigator, I said. I was going to suggest the same. His name was Stephen Carver, former detective, 20 years private practice. He arrived at my home on a Thursday afternoon carrying a worn leather satchel and the quiet economy of movement that belongs to men who have spent decades watching without being watched. 53 years old, gray at the temples. The kind of face that is immediately forgettable in the best possible way. The face of a man who has built a career out of being the least interesting person in any room. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, declined coffee, and opened a small notebook of his own. I appreciated that detail more than I expressed. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked 4 questions. Marcus's Chloe's full legal name, the name of Chloe's physician, my primary bank branch, and whether Marcus had ever been in my home without me present. I thought about that last one carefully. He was here for Christmas dinner, I said, and once in November. I cannot tell you with certainty whether he was ever here without me. Stephen wrote something down. Does your daughter have a key? A pause. Yes, I said. He nodded once without judgment and closed his notebook. Don't change your behavior in any visible way, he said before he left. Don't adjust your accounts. Don't confront anyone. Don't discuss this with your daughter. Act like nothing has changed. I looked at him evenly. Mr. Carver, I ran a hospital for 30 years. I have sat across from hostile board members and malpractice attorneys and given them nothing. I believe I can manage one dinner conversation with a man who thinks I'm a manageable old woman who doesn't read people. Stephen Carver almost smiled. Yes, he said, I believe you can. The bank called 3 days later. Gerald, my account manager of 11 years, a steady man who does not call without reason, told me someone had contacted the main service line identifying themselves as my personal assistant. They had requested information about my primary investment account, the balance, the beneficiary designations, and the process for updating authorized signatories. Gerald had denied the request. No account information had been released. I want to ask, he said carefully, whether you have a personal assistant. I do not, I said. I stood in my garden with the phone against my ear, the January air cold and indifferent against my face, and looked at the bare rose canes. A personal assistant. Someone who knew enough about my accounts to ask the right questions. Someone who didn't know enough to anticipate that Gerald would verify. Someone who was in a hurry. Someone who had a timeline. I went inside, opened the notebook to a fresh page, wrote the date, wrote Gerald's name, wrote beneficiary designations, verbal password added. Then, underneath it all, 2 words I had been circling for 3 weeks without letting myself land on them directly. He's escalating, which meant I needed to move faster. Not visibly, but faster. Stephen Carver returned 11 days later and spread 6 photographs and a 12-page report across my dining room table. Marcus Thiel, age 26, $71,000 in personal loan debt, 2 accounts delinquent, a civil judgment from a prior landlord, and this is where it stopped being background and became a pattern, a prior connection to a woman named Deborah Hartley, 64 years old, whose family had filed and subsequently withdrawn a protective order against him approximately 2 years ago. The withdrawal came 3 weeks after a financial settlement, whose terms were sealed. He had done some version of this before. The second photograph, Dr. Alan Briggs, a psychiatric practice on the east side of the city, expert witness in 7 guardianship proceedings in the past 4 years, always for the petitioning family, never for the person being assessed. Fees between $8,000 and $15,000 per engagement. Marcus had met with him twice in the past 3 weeks. The second visit lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes. The third, the offices of Whitmore and Associates, the firm my accountant had flagged, specializing in estate litigation and guardianship petitions. Marcus had walked in on January 28th and stayed 45 minutes. The financial inquiry to my accountant had come the following week. A meeting, a formalized approach, then a move on my accounts. The fourth piece, Marcus's credit history showed a hard inquiry from 6 weeks prior. A loan application for $240,000, stated purpose real estate investment, denied. He was trying to borrow $250,000 he didn't have. At the same moment, he was meeting with an estate litigation attorney and a psychiatrist who specialized in guardianship testimony. He wasn't waiting for something to happen naturally. He was manufacturing the conditions. There's one more thing, Stephen said, and his tone shifted slightly. A woman contacted me. Her name is Sophie, Renee's niece through a prior marriage, Chloe's cousin by extension. She said Marcus had approached her in January and asked her to write a character statement. He framed it as a family welfare document, said the family was concerned about your mental acuity. Stephen held my gaze. He asked her to describe specific incidents where you seemed confused, forgetful, or disoriented. She told him she hadn't witnessed any such incidents because there weren't any. He told her she might be remembering things differently than they actually happened. The kitchen was very quiet. She didn't write the statement, but she believes at least 2 other people did. I sat with that. A financial access attempt, a corrupt psychiatrist, an estate litigation attorney, fabricated character statements describing confusion and disorientation, each piece individually explainable. Together, a case, a fraudulent case built on manufactured evidence and purchased testimony, designed to strip a 19-year-old woman of her legal autonomy so the man living in her apartment could control her inheritance. And somewhere inside all of it, my daughter was either complicit or catastrophically blind. I did not yet know which. I was not certain which answer I preferred. Transfer everything to Judith Calloway's office today, I said, and I want Sophie's contact information. Already arranged, Stephen said. She's expecting it by 4. After he left, I stood at the window and looked at Victor's roses, a single bud on the cane nearest the house, pale and uncertain, but present. I turned back from the window and began building the response. Judith spent the next 3 weeks moving quietly and precisely through every legal mechanism available to us. Chloe's beneficiary designations were reviewed and reinforced. Fraud alerts were placed on every financial account. The forged healthcare proxy form was submitted to the state medical board and the county prosecutor's office as evidence of document fraud. Whitmore and Associates received a formal legal notice from Judith's office. Any guardianship petition filed against myself or Chloe Hargrove would be met with immediate immediate counter-litigation and a referral to the state bar. We were not yet ready to move openly, but the ground was prepared. I went to my board meetings. I tended my roses. I had dinner with Renee twice in February and sat across from Marcus with a glass of wine and the expression of a woman who notices nothing and suspects less. He was warm, solicitous. He asked about the hospital, about my health, about whether I was finding the winter difficult. All the questions a concerned future family member asks, all of them calibrated. I now understood. Not out of affection, but out of assessment. I gave him nothing. I smiled pleasantly and talked about the roses. What I was waiting for, specifically, was for Stephen to document the second formal meeting between Marcus and Dr. Briggs, the meeting where the psychiatric assessment was to be finalized. Once that document existed, we had the full chain: the attorney, the psychiatrist, the forged proxy, the financial inquiries. A conspiracy with a paper spine. I was 4 days from that meeting when my phone rang at 2:07 in the morning. I drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, running through exactly what I would need to do when I arrived, in what order, and with whom. I called Judith from the car. It was 2:14 a.m. She answered on the second ring, which told me she does not sleep as solidly as she pretends. It's happened, I said. He put her in the hospital, emergency room, broken arm. He told the medical staff she was intoxicated and fell. Renee left with him. 2 seconds of silence. Judith has the rare quality of processing bad news without audible reaction. Which hospital? She asked. Hargrove Medical Center. A brief pause. Of course. Another pause. Dorothy, when you walk in there, you are walking in as her grandmother and as a founding board member of that institution. You are not walking in as someone who has been investigating Marcus Thiel for 6 weeks. Tonight, you secure Chloe. You ensure she receives the correct medical protocol for suspected domestic violence. You make sure the injury is documented accurately. That is all tonight needs to accomplish. I understand. The rest happens at dawn. I'll be at my desk at 6. Call me the moment you leave the hospital. Judith, I said, merging onto the highway, the city dark and sparse around me. I want him arrested before he wakes up tomorrow. If the medical documentation supports it, and it will, I will have a prosecutor on the phone by 7. Her voice was steady and absolute. He will not have a pleasant morning. I want to tell you what it feels like to walk into a building with your name on it for a reason like this. The Hargrove Medical Center was built on a piece of land Victor and I purchased in 1987, when the neighborhood was considered an unlikely choice and everyone with an opinion offered it freely. I spent 11 years building it from a community clinic into a full-service hospital. I have walked through those glass doors during blizzards and board crises and the morning after Victor's funeral, when I came in at 6 a.m. because I did not know what else to do with a grief that had no form yet. I have never walked through them like this. The emergency bay was bright in the specific way hospitals are bright at 2 in the morning, fluorescent and merciless, without the softening that daylight brings. 3 nurses at the station, a resident reviewing a chart at the far end, 2 orderlies with a supply cart. I pushed through the inner doors. I was wearing my dark coat and my Cartier bracelet, and the expression I reserve for moments that require absolute command, not anger, not urgency. The particular quality of presence that communicates, without a single raised voice, that the room has changed. The resident looked up first, then one of the nurses. Then from the corridor to my left, Dr. Raymond Ellis, who had been walking toward the nurse's station with a chart in his hand and coffee he hadn't touched. Stopped mid-stride. Stopped completely. 14 years ago, Raymond Ellis was a talented surgical resident being passed over for a fellowship he had earned because of a political dispute I found professionally indefensible. I made 3 phone calls over 2 days and resolved it. He has never forgotten. More importantly, he has never pretended to forget, which is the rarer quality. He looked at me for 1 full second. Then he turned to every staff member in that corridor and said, in the quiet, caring voice of a man who is not asking, "Clear the corridor. Everyone back to station. Now, I know this woman." It happened in under 30 seconds. Orderlies moved. The resident stepped back. The nurses returned to their station. Raymond crossed the corridor in 8 steps and stopped a foot from me. "She's in bay 4, he said. "Radial fracture, left arm. The mechanism is inconsistent with a fall. I've already flagged it. The attending on call was about to document it as accidental." I pulled the chart. "Good, Dorothy." He held my gaze. The man who brought her in gave a statement. The mother left with him approximately 40 minutes ago. A pause. "I need you to tell me how you want this handled." I looked at him. At the 14 years of professional trust between us. At the chart still in his hand with the flag that would not be removed. "Document everything," I said. "Every bruise, every inconsistency, every detail that does not align with the stated mechanism of injury. Full domestic violence protocol. Thorough enough that no one can look at it and reach a different conclusion." He nodded. "And Raymond." I moved toward bay 4. "No one speaks to the police before I've seen her. Not because we're hiding anything, because I want to be with her when she gives her statement. She is 19 years old and she has been alone in this hospital for 40 minutes. I will not let that be 41. He stepped aside without another word. I pushed open the door to bay 4. Chloe was sitting up on the bed, arm immobilized, eyes red and swollen, wearing a hospital gown that was too large for her. She looked up when the door opened, and something behind her face, the tight, controlled holding of someone who had been trying very hard not to fall apart, gave way completely. "Grandma," she said. I sat down beside her. I took her hand, the good one, carefully. I did not say it's okay, because it was not okay, and Chloe is too intelligent for comfortable untruths. What I said was the only thing that was both true and sufficient. patient. I'm here, I said, and I already know what to do. Chloe gave her statement at 3:20 in the morning. Detective Anita Vasquez arrived at Bay 4:40 minutes after I called Raymond back to the corridor and told him it was time. Vasquez was in her late 30s, unhurried, with the practiced stillness of someone who has sat in many rooms with many frightened women and learned that patience is the only thing that reliably opens them. She set a small recorder on the tray table, introduced herself without ceremony, and looked at Chloe with the level, direct attention that communicates I believe you before a single word has been said. I sat in the chair beside the bed and did not speak. Chloe didn't need me to speak. She needed me there solidly, visibly, without agenda, while she said out loud, for the first time, in the presence of someone with the authority to act on it, what had been happening in her apartment for the past 8 months. She was precise. She was specific. She gave dates, locations, descriptions. She described the first time, a shove in October that she'd told herself was an accident, and every instance afterward, each one a degree further than the last. Each one followed by an explanation and an apology, and the specific emotional machinery that makes a person doubt what their own body just experienced. She described the staircase. She described his hand on her back. She described the floor and the sound her arm made, and Marcus's voice telling her to get up, and his expression shifting into performance mode the moment the neighbor's door opened down the hall. She described her mother arriving at the hospital, sitting beside her for 20 minutes, and then standing when Marcus called and saying, not cruelly, but with the particular helplessness of a person who cannot hold two needs simultaneously, "Baby, I have to go. He needs me right now. You're going to be okay." And then the sound of her mother's footsteps going down the corridor and away. Detective Vasquez took notes throughout. When Chloe finished, Vasquez looked at her for a moment and said simply, "You did the right thing." Then she looked at me. "Mrs. Hargrove, I understand you have additional documentation related to this individual. My attorney is compiling it currently. You will have everything by 7 this morning." Vasquez nodded. She gathered her materials. At the door, she paused. "Miss Hargrove, the fracture documentation, your statement, and the witness inconsistencies in the intake report give us more than sufficient basis for an arrest. I want you to know that before I leave this room." Chloe looked at her, then at me. Something behind her eyes, the long-held, exhausted tension of a person who has been managing an impossible situation alone, released. Not completely. These things don't release completely in a single night, but enough to be visible. "Thank you," she said. At 4:15, I stepped into the corridor and called Judith. She answered before the first ring completed, which meant she had been awake and waiting, which meant she is better at this than she admits. "The statement is done," I said. "Vasquez has it. She's moving toward an arrest warrant. I need everything we have at the prosecutor's office by 6:30. Stephen's report, the financial inquiry records, the forged proxy, the Whitmore letter." "It's already packaged," Judith said. "I've been at my desk since 3. I've contacted David Park, assistant DA, handles elder abuse and domestic violence cases. He's expecting my call at 6. Dorothy, with what we have, this is not a difficult case to prosecute. The fraud and conspiracy elements are the kind that make prosecutors interested in making examples. I want the fraud charges to move simultaneously with the domestic violence arrest. I don't want him processing the first charge before he understands that the second one exists." A brief silence. "That's David's call, but I'll communicate your preference." A pause. "The woman from before, Deborah Hartley. I made contact yesterday. She's cautious, but her attorney has indicated she may be open to a conversation. I'll follow up this morning." "Thank you, Judith," I exhaled. "Thank you for all of it. Don't thank me yet," she said. "Call me at 6. I hung up and stood in the corridor for a moment, alone in the particular way you are alone at 4 in the morning in a hospital, surrounded by evidence of other people's crises, insulated from the ordinary world by fluorescence and antiseptic and the low continuous sound of machinery doing quietly essential work. Then I went back to Bay 4, sat down beside Chloe, and stayed. At 6:47 in the morning, Marcus Thiel was arrested at the apartment he shared with my granddaughter. I was not there. I did not need to be. I was still in the chair beside Chloe's bed when Detective Vasquez sent a text that read, "In custody. No complications." I read it twice. Set the phone face down on my knee. Looked at the pale February light beginning to define the window frame. In custody. 8 months of a 19-year-old woman managing something that should never have been hers to manage. 4 months of notebooks and investigators and careful strategic patience. 3 weeks of legal architecture he had no idea existed. 1 night of a broken arm and a hospital corridor and a surgeon who stopped mid-stride and said, "I know this woman." In custody. I did not feel triumphant. That is the thing about these moments that no one tells you. They do not feel the way you imagine they will when you are in the middle of the fight. They feel quiet. They feel like the specific exhaustion that comes after sustained effort. And underneath the exhaustion, something that is not quite relief, but is adjacent to it. Chloe was asleep. She had finally stopped fighting it around 5 in the morning. She looked younger asleep, like the 8-year-old who used to fall asleep on my couch with a library book open on her chest. I stayed in the chair and let her sleep. Renee called at 7:12. "Mom." Her voice was tight and frightened. "They arrested Marcus." "Yes," I said. I kept my voice even and walked to the corridor so as not to wake Chloe. "They arrested him at 6:47 this morning." "What did you do?" A pause. "How did you—" "Mom, what did you do?" I documented what was happening to Chloe, and I gave that documentation to the people whose job it is to act on it. The arrest was based on Chloe's statement, medical evidence of deliberate injury, and 4 months of investigative work. I didn't manufacture anything anything, Renee. I assembled what was already true. 4 months? A silence. You've been doing this for 4 months and you didn't tell me. No, I said. I didn't. Why? I'm her mother. I had a right to. You left her in this hospital last night. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. She called me at 2 in the morning with a broken arm and you were here and you left. A pause. I didn't tell you what I knew because I didn't yet know which side of this you were on. I want you to understand that I say that without cruelty and with complete honesty. I did not know whether you were a victim of his manipulation or a participant in it. I could not afford to be wrong. The silence that followed was the longest of the conversation. I didn't know about the legal things, Renee said finally. Her voice had changed. The sharpness was gone. He told me the family was worried about you, that we might need to take some steps to protect your assets. He made it sound like it was about taking care of you. I know. That is how these things are framed. That is always how they are framed. I thought he loved her. A sound that might become crying, except that Renee has always fought crying as if it costs something she cannot afford to spend. I thought I finally got something right. There it was, underneath all of it. Underneath the misplaced loyalty and the selective blindness and 42 years of choosing the wrong things, just my daughter wanting to have gotten something right. Renee, I said, Chloe is asleep 20 feet from where I'm standing. She has a broken arm and she spent last night giving a police statement. And what she needs now, not eventually, not when this is more comfortable, is her mother, not to explain, not to justify, just to be here. A long pause. Is she awake? Not yet. I'll be there in 30 minutes. I'll be here, I said. I hung up, stood in the corridor for a moment, then went back inside and waited for my daughter to find her way to the right side of things. Not because I was certain she would, but because I have learned in 67 years that the space between where a person is and where they need to be is not always as large as it looks from the outside. Sometimes people just need someone to leave the door open. At 9:15, Judith called with the full picture. David Park, assistant DA, had reviewed everything by 8. The domestic violence charge was moving forward without complication. More significantly, the fraud conspiracy evidence, Marcus's meetings with Dr. Briggs, the forged healthcare proxy, the financial inquiries, the Whitmore connection, was being reviewed for a separate indictment. Park had used the phrase prosecutorial interest twice, which Judith described as a good sign and I recognized as an understatement. Whitmore and Associates had declined to represent Marcus in any capacity going forward. Dr. Alan Briggs had received a formal inquiry from the State Medical Board regarding his testimony practices, initiated by a complaint filed at 6 that morning by 3 attorneys who had been on the opposing side of his expert testimony in prior guardianship proceedings. Judith did not confirm that she had coordinated those filings. She did not need to. And Deborah Hartley, the woman from 2 years ago whose protective order had been quietly withdrawn after a sealed financial settlement, had agreed to speak with the prosecutor's office. How is Chloe? Judith asked before she hung up. She slept 4 hours. Her mother arrived 20 minutes ago. They are not talking yet. They are sitting in the same room. And you? I looked through the small window in the bay door at my daughter and my granddaughter. Renee in the chair I had occupied all night. Chloe awake now, looking at her mother with an expression that was not yet forgiveness but was not closed either. The pale morning light was full and present. Nothing tentative about it anymore. I'm standing in a hospital corridor that bears my name, I said. I'm 67 years old and I haven't slept and my coffee has been cold for 2 hours and somehow everything that needed to happen today has happened. Judith was quiet for a moment. Go home and sleep. In a little while, I said, but I didn't move, not yet. I watched my daughter reach across the bed and take Chloe's good hand, watched Chloe look down at their joined hands and then look up and say something I couldn't hear through the glass. I pressed my hand briefly against the door for no reason I could have explained and every reason that needed no explanation. Then I went to find coffee that wasn't cold. 3 months is not a long time. It is not long enough to undo 8 months of something that should never have happened. It is not long enough to rebuild what a person loses when the first adult who should have protected them walks out of a hospital corridor instead. But 3 months is long enough for some things. And I have learned over 67 years to pay attention to what the time you have actually contains, rather than measuring it against the time you wish you had. Marcus Thiel entered a guilty plea on the domestic violence charge in the second week of March. The fraud conspiracy charges were still moving through David Park's office with the methodical care of a man who understands that a well-built case is worth more than a fast one. Deborah Hartley had given a full statement. Dr. Alan Briggs had surrendered his expert witness certification pending the medical board review. He would not be a problem again. Not for Chloe. Not for anyone else. I noted it in my leather notebook, wrote the date, and closed it. Put it in the drawer of my bedside table. Some records you keep. Others you keep differently. Not in a place you return to regularly, but in a place that simply exists quietly, as evidence that something happened and was handled and is finished. Chloe went back to classes in the second week of February. She called me the evening before the meeting with her academic advisor, where she would have to describe what had happened in terms she hadn't yet said out loud to an institutional audience. I don't know how to talk about it without it becoming the thing that defines me, she said. I don't want to be the girl it happened to. I want to be the person I was trying to become. Those are not mutually exclusive, I said. You are allowed to be both. The thing that happened to you is part of your history. It is not the summary of it. A pause. How do you do that? Talk about hard things without letting them take up more space than they deserve? Practice, I said. And a genuine belief that the hard things are not the most interesting things about you They're just the ones that required the most of you temporarily. She was quiet for a moment. I want to be a good doctor, she said. I think I understand some things now that I wouldn't have understood otherwise. About why people stay in situations that look like obvious choices from the outside. That understanding, I said, will make you an extraordinary physician. It will not make the cost of obtaining it reasonable, but it will make it mean something. She passed her makeup examinations in the first week of March. She called me afterward and said simply, "I did it, Grandma." And the sound of those 4 words, the uncomplicated pride of a person who has returned to the thing they were meant to be doing, was worth considerably more than the sleepless nights and the cold coffee and every hour I spent in that hospital corridor. On the first Saturday in April, I was in my garden when I heard the gate. The roses were coming in, the first real bloom of the season, the pale pink ones Victor planted along the south wall because he said they caught the morning light better than anything he'd ever seen. I was standing there with my coffee, still in my robe, doing nothing in particular except being present in a place that has always been good for that, when the gate opened and Chloe came through it with a medical textbook under one arm and a paper bag from the bakery on the corner in the other hand. Old university sweatshirt, hair pulled back, no particular effort made toward appearances. She looked entirely like herself. "I brought croissants," she said, "and I have a question about the brachial plexus that my professor explained in a way that made absolutely no sense." I looked at her, my granddaughter, the most brilliant 19-year-old I have ever known, standing in my garden on a Saturday morning with croissants and a neurology question, exactly as she should be. "The croissants earn you a full explanation," I said. "Come in." We sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours. She ate both croissants and most of mine. I drew her a diagram on the back of a grocery receipt, and she photographed it and sent it to 3 classmates without asking, which is a habit she has always had and which I have never corrected, because it suggests correctly that she moves through the world assuming what she has is worth sharing. When she finally stood to leave, she paused at the kitchen door. "Grandma." She turned, and her expression had the particular quality it gets when she's been assembling something for a while. "I've been thinking about what Dr. Ellis said that night. Clear the room. I know this woman. I used to think that was about your name on the building." A pause. "But I think it was about something else. I think it was about what kind of person you've been to people for 40 years. That's what he recognized." I looked at her for a moment. "I think," I said carefully, "that you are going to be a remarkable physician." "I know," she said without false modesty, which is the right response. Then she smiled. "The real one, Victor's one, the one that has always made everything in a room seem slightly more manageable," and went through the door and down the path and through the gate. I stood in the kitchen and listened to her footsteps until they were gone. Then I looked at the garden, at the south wall where the roses were coming in exactly as they always did in April, at the morning light on the pale pink blooms, at the ordinary, extraordinary beauty of a day that contained nothing more dramatic than croissants and neurology and my granddaughter's voice. Victor used to say, "You know a thing was worth fighting for by how it feels when the fighting is over." He was right. He was right about most things. That's probably why I still miss him every single morning.